But now you get someone who's 23 years old, just fresh out of college a couple years ago coming in. And there were some concerns because people didn't know, do we trust him? Can he do the job and stuff like that? So I come back from my lunch break on my first day, and in my mailbox that was attached to my door in my office was a package that was left anonymously. There was no name associated with it, with a note that said something for when you realize that this is a job that the grown-ups need to do.
Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of April 1st, 2024. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including the March Mania competition comes to its conclusion. We have a winner. A look back at a moment of leadership under fire. It's April Fool's Day, and I've got humor. And I have a conversation with an elected official who you might say got his start in the band world. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. So technically, this is the April Fool's Day edition of BandWagon. By a fluke of the calendar, the episode drops on April Fool's Day, so some might predict that I'm going to go all practical joke on you. You know, goofy rearrangement of the theme jingle, parodies of this and that. I could have done that sort of thing. This time around, at least, I didn't really. Although I could easily say, hey, for the big trio section interview, I had a conversation with the mayor of a Massachusetts city, and people might say, he's kidding, right? He's not kidding. I'm not kidding. And neither is this particular mayor. So that's coming up later in the program. And in response to my little call to action, which I posted on various social media channels over the course of the last few weeks, I do have a couple of listener-contributed stories from their band lives that involve a certain amount of humor. Because, honestly, the great majority of the band's stories ever told involve a certain amount of humor. Kind of comes with the territory, after all. And right up at the top, I've got a little reporting on a U.S. Marine band parody of an American institution. Reporting that I've tried to present as if you were listening to the opening segment of ESPN's Sports Center. We'll see how that goes. So, you can't stop me. You can only hope to contain me. Let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline, Washington, D.C., and the Internet. With the slogan of 32 marches, 4 weeks, 1 champion, the United States Marine Band, the Commandant's Own, hosted its annual Sousa's March Mania, a tournament pitting 32 musical marches against each other for voters to decide which one would be crowned the year's champion march. Marches competed head-to-head every weekday from March 4th to the 28th. The opening round featured online voting between March 4th and 13th. Highlights included easy victories for Liberty Bell, the Thunderer, and Semper Fidelis in their opening round matchups. There were a few other notable results. The music of John Williams was included in this year's brackets. March of the Resistance, from Williams' score for the Star Wars sequel trilogy, beat out They Are There by 6,360 to 6,303, just 57 votes. Meanwhile, in a less suspenseful Game 4 contest, the iconic Imperial March took down the Pride of Pittsburgh, 10,086 votes to 2,427. In what I would call an upset, given the familiarity of its tune, the Colonel Bogey March lost to Julius Fuchik's Entry of the Gladiators, 10,404 votes to 2,730. American Patrol rolled over H.M. Jolly's by 16,829 votes to 3,832, a nearly 12,000 vote win. And Percy Granger's Children's March slipped past the Shantyman's March, 9,548 to 9,522, just a 26 vote margin. See? Every person's vote counts. In the round of 16, Semper Fidelis edged American Patrol. Nobles of the Mystic Shrine was edged out by a march called O. Henry. To get to the final four, the relatively little-known Carl King March, Cyrus the Great, edged March of the Resistance by just 309 votes out of a total of 12,500 cast. In what could be considered the upset of the tournament, Entry of the Gladiators took down the Thunderer, 4,842 votes to just 2,786. Semper Fidelis got over the line, 8,007 to 7,571 votes over the aforementioned O. Henry. And in a battle of the generations, or perhaps a passing of the torch, or perhaps a victory by Star Wars over Monty Python. By a score of 4,951 to 2,725 votes, Liberty Bell was defeated by John Williams' Imperial March. The final contest was between John Philip Sousa's Semper Fidelis, which slipped past entry of the Gladiators by just 43 votes out of 13,061 votes cast, and Cyrus the Great, which completed its elimination of the Star Wars repertoire by edging out Darth Vader's Imperial March, 9,312 votes to 9,130. The 2024 champion of Sousa's March Mania was announced on the 29th of March, and it was the Giant Slayer, Cyrus the Great. Notably, when the winner was announced to the Marine Band, which was ready to play on live stream either one of the finalist marches directly after the announcement, at least a few of the musicians seemed genuinely pleased, even though Cyrus had defeated the official march of the Marine Corps. I tried to get to this year's champion for a post-march interview, but Cyrus was already in his limo. I'll try to move faster at the end of next year's March Mania tournament. And that's news and notes from the band world for this week. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Now we'll take a quick break and meet you on the other side. Do keep listening, please. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this week's second strain, this past November was the 10th anniversary of a remarkable moment in college football rivalry history, and of a band-related moment in that game that is something of an object lesson, certainly a demonstration of student leadership that has stuck in my head ever since. Now, I come from New England, and as such, my idea of a sports rivalry is the Red Sox and the Yankees. Many years of intense competition and clashes of personalities have fueled a classic Hatfield and McCoy, Capulet and Montague situation, albeit perhaps with less emphasis on gunfire and stabbings. But I am well aware that there are sports rivalries in this country that make the Sox and the Yanks look like a courtly country dance. Michigan and Ohio State, UCLA and USC, Duke and North Carolina, Harvard and Yale. I'm sure I'm leaving some out, and you are welcome to send me an email and chastise me for doing so. Better yet, hey, that's a pretty good idea for a segment or a whole episode of this podcast. Band rivalries. Anyway, the one that I'm thinking of right now is Alabama and Auburn. Or, if you prefer, Auburn and Alabama. Every year, those two football teams meet in what is known as the Iron Bowl. No matter which team is doing poorly or well, it's always a heated affair. In 2013, the game came down to the last play. It was a 56-yard field goal attempt by the Alabama kicker. A successful kick would win the game for the Crimson Tide. A miss would mean the game would end in a tie. How disappointing. Except that a missed kick could be caught by the defending team and they could try to run it back for a touchdown. Not that that was very likely. That is, of course, exactly what happened. And since it was an Auburn home game, the Auburn Stadium went out of its mind crazy. I think that in order to understand what it feels like to have your team win that kind of game in heart-stopping fashion, I would need to remember what it felt like when the Red Sox came back from 3 games to none down in the League Championship Series to beat the Yankees, and for the sake of my Yankee fan friends, I shall describe that no further, except to say that we all went out of our minds crazy. Now, though, I have to imagine that this might happen every single football season. I'm going to play a little audio of that last Iron Bowl play, including a bit of the radio call. It'll give you a rough idea of the environment before and after the kick and the return and the touchdown. And you will hear the Auburn band start to play its fight song.
56-yarder. Does not have the leg. And Chris Davis takes it in the back of the end zone. He'll run it out to the 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game. Auburn's going to win the football game. He ran the missed field goal back. He ran it back 109 yards. They're not going to keep him off the field tonight. Holy cow. Oh, my God. Auburn wins. Auburn has won the Iron Bowl. Auburn has won the Iron Bowl in the most unbelievable fashion you will ever see.
Whew. As the band saw that the kick would not go through the goalposts, they settled in to get ready to play their fight song at the end of a tie game. Ho-hum. Okay, I guess. As the kick returner made his way down the field, the band and its directors kept track of the play with increasing interest, and as it became clear that something miraculous was in the process of happening, lots of things started to happen all at once. And because this is an audio-only podcast, I will need to describe them. Here's what you couldn't see. The band jumping up and down, shouting and cheering and screaming, and in many cases weeping with joy. The band's director and assistant director doing the same. All of the above verbs were in play. The band then scrambling to get their instruments to their faces or their sticks to their drums, but only because one very important thing happened, which I will get to presently. The band director was standing on the center podium, located about 3 band rows up from the front row of flutes and piccolos. He was standing behind the head drum major. The assistant director was standing at the front row of flutes and piccolos, as were the 2 other drum majors. As the kick returner made his way down the field to score, while everybody else in the band, literally everybody else, was watching that play develop and getting more and more ecstatic about the possible result, the head drum major was on the podium, looking up and to her right toward the jumbotron, which was showing the television coverage of the game. When it became clear that the returner was likely to score, that head drum major put up the hand signal that meant play the fight song in this certain way, and showed it to the bandos on her left, on her right, and in front of her, and she made eye contact with the drum line. As soon as the ball crossed the goal line, she gave the old 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 play signs, and the band nailed that downbeat. Now, many of the piccolos played very few of the notes since they were smiling so widely. Now, I'm not dumping on anyone. I can only imagine the excitement of the moment. As a high school and college band director, I experienced a few moments of, oh wow, this is a great thing for our team, but I have to keep my head in the game and take care of my band responsibilities. This is not always easy. But of the Auburn Band's leadership team, 2 professional staff members and 3 drum majors, there was one person whose head was completely in the game from the field goal attempt all the way to about the halfway point of the fight song, and that was the head drum major. The director on the podium alternately threw his hands and nearly his clipboard into the air or clasped his hands to his head. The assistant director wrapped the nearest drum major in a bear hug and then fell to his knees, hands on his head, verklempt. The other drum major, standing in front of the flutes, jumped around a lot. And then, as the nearby Auburn fans clambered down the aisle next to the band, trying to get on the field and nearly bumping into band members, he did position himself such that he could maybe guard the end flutes from having their instruments knocked on the field. But they all but one of them, were entirely, understandably, caught up in the moment and emotional, and they became football fans and nothing else. The head drum major, to quote a favorite teacher of mine, was leading with a heart of fire, but a head of ice. The band got to the end of the fight song, and that drum major had already been putting up the hand signals for the next song to play, because it was very clear that the band was going to need to keep playing for a while. And the band spared a glance at their very competent and cool and coherent student leader, understood what to play next, and played it. And the video ends there. To this day, I have kept that drum major. I don't know her name, certainly don't know what she's doing now, certainly hope she was a music ed major and has given some high school band somewhere the benefit of her able leadership. I have kept that drum major at the very top of my list of great leadership moments. It took her leadership colleagues quite a while, in football band time, to gather themselves up and get back to being leaders. It took that drum major next to no time at all. She was, to quote her own fight song lyrics, fearless and true. Now, we'll take another short break, and when we return, I get to pretend I'm hosting Meet the Press. Somewhat, sorta. It's a conversation I actually recorded the day after BandWagon's first episodes dropped, and there's a reference to the date in the middle of my chat with an actual elected official. So with all that in mind, I hope you'll stay with me. Okay, let's change keys and get into the trio section. This week in the trio section, it is an honor and a privilege to be joined by a gentleman whom I first encountered in the summer drum major clinic world, and who now is the living embodiment of the phrase, I knew him when. Most recently, he was profiled in the Worcester Business Journal's Power 50 for 2023, and Pulse Magazine included him in its New Year's Day 2024 article, People to Watch 2024. His resume is lengthy, and I just want to get this conversation going, so please help me welcome to the BandWagon podcast, the mayor of Gardner, Massachusetts, the Honorable Michael J. Nicholson. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Rob. How you doing?
I am well, and I'm thrilled that you made time to do this. You are a gentleman who is a civic leader and an elected official, and you got a schedule.
Yeah, it's been busy, but it's a good busy. And that's the way I've always taken this job, is that there's a lot of work that we're doing, but it's a lot of good work. And I've really loved and enjoyed the 4 years I've been here as mayor.
There are definitely listeners of this podcast who know who you are from having crossed paths with you before. But for those who haven't had that pleasure, I will say this. I would argue that you are perhaps not people's stereotypical preconceived idea of a city mayor. And honestly, more and more politicians who lead towns or cities or states are starting to look less and less like Josh Brolin or Hal Holbrook or Meryl Streep. There's increasing diversity with respect to racial and other identities. You represent a different, unusual politician demographic. And let's just say that when I first met you, you were still in high school, and that was not honestly a huge amount of time ago.
No, just 14 years ago, 2010.
Time flies when you're getting work done. But before we dig into that, I'd like to start this conversation with the now standard lightning round questions that I ask of people who come on, just so people can get a sense of who they're listening to. And since it's a band podcast, not a political science podcast, the questions are maybe not your usual. But first up, what's your primary instrument?
I'm a trumpet player.
This is a question I think I know the answer to, but I might not. Do you currently have a band-related role?
Not currently. Aside from, helping out with the Drum Major Academy every summer, Gardner used to have a couple community band here. It hasn't had one for a couple of years, so hopefully we can bring that back, because I do miss playing with the group. I do play on the side, but not currently.
How did you get into playing the trumpet?
It's actually a neat story that involves both sides of my families. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, and growing up, he was like, I want someone to play taps at my funeral, and he bought me my first trumpet. And then at the same time, my uncle was having conversations with my mother, because I was in 6th grade when I picked up my instrument. And he was saying, when Mike gets to high school, the best way for him to get a group of friends really quickly and, to get his own support group is if he joins the band. My uncle wasn't in band, but he saw how close people who were in band were with each other and how they automatically formed that tight-knit group of friends. So it almost worked out that at both, at the same time, both sets of the family were pushing for me to join some type of band. And that's how I started. I went to a private Catholic middle school that didn't really have a band program at the time. They do now, but they didn't back then. So my first experience playing in band was when I got to high school.
So the burning question, how does a person in his mid-20s get to be a mayor?
It was a journey I didn't expect, but it's one that, with every twist and turns, things just worked out the right way. And I'm really happy with where I ended up. I started in 2013 when I was graduating high school. The sitting mayor at the time and my predecessor, Mark Hawk, asked me if I wanted an internship with him for the summer. And I took it. And I really liked what I was doing. And even if it was just an internship at the time, I could see the work that I was doing. And I think that that's one of the best things about being in this job or working in local government is, I could be driving to work one day and see that there's a swing set broken in one of our playgrounds and make a phone call and say, hey, the swing set's broken. Can you fix that swing? And then if I'm driving on my way home that same day and there's a child swinging on the fixed swing, it's every feeling in the world. And it just makes the job that much worth it. And I could start to see bits and pieces of that back then. And when that internship was over and I was going off to band camp, Mayor Hawk sat me down and said, I'd like to have you back during your winter break. And then after winter break, I'd like to have you back when you're back in the summer. And I ended up working for him as an intern every break that I had while I was at UMass until I graduated with my bachelor's degree in 2016. And he offered me a job. And the job was just starting to transit. It was the executive aide position. It's the equivalent of a chief of staff in this office. And it was just starting to transition from a newly created part-time position to a full-time position. I graduated with my bachelor's a year early, but I wanted to stay at UMass for the full 4 years, mainly because of band, but also because of my friends and everything else that was there. So I did a 1-year master's program. So he let me stay part-time in the role while I did my 1-year master's program, and then went full-time after I graduated with my master's degree in 2017. 2019 came around, as happens in most political theaters. The executive, the mayor, and the city council, the legislative branch, had a little tussle with each other over some ideas of priorities, particularly with financing. There was some threats from the city council that my pay was going to be cut from the budget as a way to get back at the mayor at the time. So I started looking. I applied for a couple of different jobs here and there, and I think, after seven, thank you for your resume, but we're not interested. I was like, and this was for smaller jobs. I was looking at economic development jobs. I was looking for town planner jobs, things like that. I was like, you know what? I've worked in a mayor's office for a couple of years now. One of the things that you hear when all of the mayors get together on a monthly basis is that a lot of the people who decide to leave the mayoral profession go into town administrator or town manager work because it's a hired position where you're doing a very similar job. You're just reporting to a select board. So you remove yourself from the political equation, but you're doing the same job of, overseeing the operations of the city, not as the chief executive officer at that point, but as a chief administrative officer where you're reporting to someone else. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go for the hard job. I'm going to apply for a couple town administrative positions, hopefully get an interview that I can, take what I learned from those harder interviews and put it for work so that I can go back to the jobs that I was actually applying for before. Well, I applied and I got hired as Rutland's town administrator as a result. Something that was my pie in the sky. Like, I'm just going to, see what sticks and hopefully take that experience and translate it into a smaller position because I didn't think I was ready, but they did.
And they thought you were ready, and you were age what now?
I was 23 when I was hired in the town of Rutland.
And there are going to be people in the world who see that and say, he's just a kid. What does he know? What can he do? And I can only imagine the struggles.
Yeah, my first day, I'll never forget it. I actually have them here in my office. I can reach them in a second, but my first day on the job. Now, Rutland's a very small town, and it's a very, very nice community. I loved working there. But for the opportunities that came up somewhere else, here in Gardner, I would have loved to stay there. It's just a very nice, small farming community. But they were going through changes. I was their second town administrator, and the town just turned 300. And they were transitioning for going to a smaller town of a couple thousand people to recognizing that they were getting closer to that 10,000 mark and that they wanted a professional town administrator role to help manage things in the town. So Margaret Nardowitz was the first town administrator. She stayed there for 3 years, and then she went to the town of Berlin. So when I was hired, it was still a very new position that most people in the town were still getting used to having. But now you get someone who's 23 years old, just fresh out of college a couple years ago coming in. And there were some concerns because people didn't know, do we trust him? Can he do the job and stuff like that? So I come back from my lunch break on my first day, and in my mailbox that was attached to my door in my office was a package that was left anonymously. There was no name associated with it, with a note that said something for when you realize that this is a job that the grown-ups need to do. And I opened the bag, and it was a box of pacifiers.
Huh.
It was something that, there was a line that I, was Sard thought at DMA that I heard a couple years, and it was something that then was echoed by one of my friends who was in the trumpet section at UMass, that when things like that happen, you have two choices. You can either get bitter or you can get better. And that's one of the things that I chose to take, is to get better. So that's why I still have these, and I keep them in my office in view of my desk, because it's your jet fuel to say that you have someone to prove wrong. And if you just do the job the way you know you can do the job, that's why you're in this seat. That's why that's not just me as town administrator or mayor, but in any profession, someone's always going to be there to try to put you down, and you can get bitter or you can get better. And it's one of those, you just use it as an excuse to, if you do your job the right way, you are proving them wrong. And there's no need to take it any further than that. I never learned who put those there. Any inklings that I have who may put them there, that doesn't matter, because in the end, it gave me an excuse to do my job better, and that internal drive for me to do my job in the way that I thought it was supposed to be done. And I'm pretty proud of what we were able to do over there.
I imagine that nobody goes into politics and is surprised by the occasional moment of poke.
Oh, no, never, never. I've been compared to Sid from Toy Story. I've been compared to Howdy Doody, but yeah, you got to learn to take these things and just laugh. I mean, that's part of the job, and it's an occupational hazard. And quite frankly, it's the way it's meant to be set up, that you have these differing points of views. And while people may take it to the extreme sometimes and you feel disrespected or something like that, you just have to realize that, just like you care about something, they care about something else on the opposite side of that coin. And you just laugh it off, because if you don't, you're going to let it get to you, and it's going to affect your work. And you're there to do a job, and you have to do that job.
Something that really doesn't have anything to do with this particular podcast, and certainly a subject area, but what is true about me is that I marinate in the news. I follow the news as much as I possibly can, and which means that I tend to focus on national politics quite a bit. And as we know, national politics is crazy, and it appears almost to exist to be extreme. It's refreshing, and I should say this with the full disclosure and the caveat that no money changed hands here. I'm not shilling for Nicholson here, but it is kind of refreshing to hear an elected official talk about fixing swing sets, and to read Facebook posts or press releases when they come through about things like, look what we're trying to do for the people of the city that I'm representing, whether it's bringing businesses into town, and there's tons of that, or whatever it happens to be.
No, I have a policy that I never say my opponent's name during an election season. And the reason why I have that policy, and other people say you have to sell yourself. And yes, you have to sell yourself. My job is to tell you why you should vote for me, not why you shouldn't vote for the other person, because that's your right as a voter and as a, American citizen to decide for yourself. I can tell you everything that's good about me, and that's my job. And it's one of those things like we hear, the band is the biggest support for the other bands on the field, is that when you're in this position and your name is on the ballot, someone else's name is on the ballot for the same reason that yours is, because they care about the community and they just have a different perspective. And just because you're playing one line of the staff doesn't mean that someone else isn't playing another melody somewhere else. And you have to recognize and respect that. And whether or not the other person's respecting that in the same perspective that you are, I will never, like I said, I never say my opponent's name, because my campaign is about me and what I want to see for Gardner, or whatever community you're running in, or whatever community you're running. It's not about the people who are doing something else. You have a job to do, and that's why you're there. And that's why you yourself need to sell yourself. And I think that gets lost in a lot of other races.
I can imagine it makes it a little easier to sleep at night, too.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
So you are town administrator in Rutland, and not to cut to the chase exactly, but the whole Gardner thing comes up, and I'm reminded of a conversation I had when I very first started teaching with the gentleman who was the head of the fine arts department and was my supervisor, but he was in the art department. And so he looked at me and said, I don't know what you do with music, but do it, and I will support you. And I said, great. And he said to me, a healthy organization, be it a school district or whatever, supports its people even when they're looking to move to the next big thing. How did Rutland take the news that you were running for mayor in Gardner?
It was just an interesting time to begin with, but I was fully supported. And that's the thing, too, is that I didn't know. I lost sleep trying to figure out how to tell my 5-member board that I was going to be running. Because the other situation was, if I lost, I still had 2 years on my contract back in Rutland that I was going to have to go back to, and they were going to know that I tried to leave. And it's one of those that you toy with that in your head. And I met with my board, the chair of the board first. Her name is Sheila Dibb. She was a really good support system, and she knew. And what I said to her was, I didn't expect the opportunity to come up. I did not expect my predecessor to give his resignation 2 days after he won his reelection. But what it was is he didn't know if he was going to win his reelection or not. So he started looking for a backup plan, and the backup plan gave him just an offer he couldn't refuse. It was best for him. It was best for his family, and you can't fault anyone for that. So when I talked to my board chair, I was like, listen, I love the town. There's a lot I could do with this town, and I could stay with this town, as I've said earlier in this podcast. But I have the opportunity now to do the same job in my hometown, in the place that I grew up. And it's home, and it's the same. And, she looked at me and she goes, you know what? The reason you just said is the same reason I'm on the board here and ran for office here. So I can't fault you for that either. The issue is we had for those of you who are familiar with New England government, we had a town meeting that night. And so her only caveat was, don't tell anyone until after the town meeting, because we don't want that to overshadow what we actually are trying to accomplish tonight. And so I met with the entire board that night before the town meeting, about 5 minutes before, and I let them all know that I was going to be announcing my campaign the next day. And then it was off to the races. I had my campaign kickoff. That was in November of 2019. And that timeline is going to be very particular and important for all of this. I had my campaign kickoff on February 3rd. My entire board from Rutland was there because they were there to support me. And I thought that was the best feeling that I could have, was that, they knew that I was leaving them, but they were also there to support me. And the thing that they kept saying, Jeff Stillings, Skip Clark, Wayne Walker, all of them, was that you can't fault someone for wanting to make a difference in their own community, because they were doing the same thing in theirs. However, the world changed a little bit exactly 1 month after I had my campaign kickoff. My February 2020, March 2020 comes around, and the world changed when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. So now not only am I running for office to be a chief executive in my hometown that's now running with an acting mayor, but also helping lead Rutland through the COVID-19 pandemic. My election in Gardner was postponed 6 times by the state because we didn't know how to have an election. How could people come together and vote when we were telling everyone stay home and don't go out? So when the state finally allowed us to have the election, the original election dates before the COVID-19 pandemic was an April 15th primary or preliminary because municipal office in Massachusetts is a nonpartisan race. So you use the term primary for a partisan race, preliminary for a nonpartisan race where everyone's just on the ballot. You vote for one, the top two move on to the next round. With a final election on Cinco de Mayo. So we were planning all of these, different events, and then we couldn't. So my election finally had a preliminary election on June 1st with a final election on June 30th. So meanwhile, I'm still running Rutland through the different stages of the COVID-19 pandemic and meeting with my staff on how to, do virtual remote work. How do we get the town services across? How do we keep our industries going? Because restaurant industries was the only businesses that Rutland really had at the time. I remember we had a dog walk challenge where I had a video in my office in Rutland where I brought my dog in for the video just to, get people's spirits brought up. So then I finally get elected mayor. I have my inauguration and I'm sworn in on July 14th. Rutland, however, needed someone because we're still in the midst of, we're just starting to open everything up. So Gardner needed to open up and Rutland needed to open up at the same time. They posted the position, they had a search committee going, but they needed someone to steer the ship still. So from July 14th, 2020 till October 1st of 2020, I was daytime mayor in Gardner, nighttime town administrator in Rutland. So I'm running both of the cities at the same time and meeting with the staff on an overlap basis just to get everything going through the open up. And mind you, I'm still in law school. So I'm taking my night law classes in September and October at the time.
Sure.
But then eventually, we get to a point where Rutland has a new town administrator. I can focus here in Gardner. I graduate with my law degree the following spring, and things just move forward as they were supposed to go.
I'm tired just thinking about
it. It's this, the start thought, adopt, adapt, and be willing to change. And that's what we had to do during all of that time period. I'll never forget the day that Governor Baker announced that we had to close everything because of the pandemic and the restrictions went into place. The first thing I thought of was I need to get the team together because the team needs to be on the same page and we need to come up with a procedure and get everything going. So I called all of my department heads in Rutland into my office and I said, okay, let's sit down and plan this out. And as we were leaving the room, one of my department heads was like, wait a minute, we're now going to go tell everyone, don't all get together in the same room like we just did. And it just took that mindset for us to be like, okay, we need to change our own mindset because we're running on autopilot and that's not going to fit this situation. So it took a lot of creative thinking.
We have already started to answer a question that occurred to me to ask in the middle of this, and then it shows up at the end for any of these conversations that I do. But I'm going to loop it into one of your early mayoral accomplishments, I think, which was overseeing the negotiation of a school budget that actually added fine arts positions. Talk a little bit about how that came to be.
It was actually exactly 2 years ago yesterday that we were able to make this announcement because we wanted to make, I personally wanted to make it on March 4th. I thought it would be the fun day that we could make the March 4th announcement. I was used to everyone, all my friends posting the marching band pictures for March 4th. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. But it was something that was on my mind for a while. I was a freshman at Gardner High School when the budget cuts were made that cut the Gardner Elementary School band program. It was something that we could see the effects of. I remember the last performance of the previous Gardner Elementary School band program because it was Gardner High School's band night, where Gardner High School invites the middle school and the elementary school band onto the high school football field during the halftime show of one of the Friday night football games. And when I was a freshman at Gardner High School, the Gardner High School band had 90 members of it. And we had a trumpet section of 15. And, I distinctly remember what that's like. When I took office in 2020, the Gardner High School band had 27 members total. And that's including the color guard. So that's not just the playing members. So you could see the impact of that feeder program going to the wayside. Now, Gardner has a very strong youth sports program. Soccer has a very strong private soccer league. Hockey has a very strong private youth hockey league. There are different things like that that the private sector can fill in. but there's no one who's out there saying, I'm going to do my own private band program for elementary school kids. So one of the things that we looked at when I met with the superintendent, who himself is a former bando, was just in the job a couple years when I took office too, has performed with the elementary school and the middle school and the high school at certain times at the different concerts with his guitar, and just understands music. And I told him, one of the things I'd like to do is reinstate the elementary school band director position so that we can get that back in. Because right now the students weren't touching instruments until they moved into Gardner Middle School in 5th grade. So you lose that learning curve.
Yeah.
And he was like, I totally agree. And he goes, quite frankly, I was looking to add another elective at the elementary school level because I need more common planning time across the teachers. While that's not the goal, it gets us to where we both need to be, and it can academic achievement too. So the position was included in the budget again. We announced it when I submitted the budget to the city council on March 4th, a couple of years ago, and it had unanimous approval from the school committee and the city council because they saw that the need was there. In its first year, 210 students signed up for band in the elementary school. Mrs. Michelle Hefner, former UMass drum major, former Gardner drum major, longtime Gardner High School music teacher, stepped into that role, and she's done a lightning job with it. We've had around 200 students in it every year since. Now, 200 students sounds like a lot to begin with, and we'll sometimes here in Gardner say that that's a third of the school population itself, which also says a lot there. But sometimes even I forget that we only offer band for grades 3 and 4 at the elementary school. But that elementary school has a population of pre-K through 4. So that's 200 students just in those 2 upper grades of a 5-grade school. So that's something that I really think shows that impact even more, is that we gave these students an opportunity to learn, and they're thriving in it. I was just there yesterday to just see the program again. And this is the first year in, I think, 14 years, because it was 2010 when that program was cut, that the elementary school students are taking people to the Great East Festival because they've been able to progress that much and, go to a festival style show where they can learn with a clinician. We also have a different program in Gardner called, we call it locally the Williams Rockwell Educational Gift Fund. What happened is back in 2017, one of the new principals at Gardner High School was cleaning out a vault, and we found a crate, and we opened the crate, and inside the crate was an original Norman Rockwell painting, Willie Gillis in Convoy, it was called. And looking back in what people knew of the history of the painting, back in the 1950s, the principal of Gardner High School at the time, Mr. Williams, went to Rockwell's studio and asked if he could donate a painting to use as the class gift, and so discount the price enough so the class could afford it, and it would be a gift to Gardner High School. So there was a painting that Rockwell had painted right at the end of World War II. And it was, Willie Gillis, his character that he painted in several different things. And it was him in an Army caravan van. And he finished it, and then the war ended. So he thought he couldn't sell it at full price. So he donated it to the school. And it was up on the walls for several years. An insurance appraiser came around and said, you really need to get that off the wall. It's not protected under glass. It's worth a lot of money. So the mayor at the time decided to sell it at auction. It sold for $1.9 million. And what happened was we took the proceeds of that fund and put it into an investment account. And the interest on the principal is given out as grants to promote the arts and different general programs in the school district on an annual basis. Since its first year, we've given out just about $600,000 in grants to our teachers in the school district from the interest off of that painting sale. So we took some of that, got the equipment that they needed. The city council voted to give them an additional $100,000 grant just to purchase things across the district. So that way, not only are we having a strong elementary school program, but since the middle school and high school program hadn't been invested in years and needed to up their equipment and things like that so that they could catch up, so that when these students progressed through schools, we weren't trying to play catch up as they moved up forward and got them so they got disinterested in band. We were able to purchase $100,000 worth of new music and equipment for our entire music program across our school district.
This question was on my mind before, and having heard you say a number of things, I'm thinking maybe the answer is different than I thought. But I wondered if your previous time as a Gardner band student and people's knowledge that that was true make all that effort to reinstate music positions and to do all that. Did that make that effort easier or more challenging?
Depended on who you were talking to at the time. There were people who reached out to me and were like, we have a soccer team too. Or there were people that reached out to me as like, math is also a subject taught at school. And the conversation that I had with them is, yeah, I get it. But again, you have certain things you can rely on in a sports program or in an academic setting that you can't rely on so much in a arts setting or a music setting. You can have that feeder program because we have Chair City Soccer League. You can have that feeder program because we have the Sting Hockey League. You can have, Central Mass Flag, which is our flag football league. All of those are going to get people when they're young and then get them interested in the sports that they are as they move up. We have certain benchmarks we have to meet with our regular reading, writing, and arithmetic curriculum that we have that get people up. Additionally, from that, there's additional state funding that goes specifically towards those programs and what's called innovative pathway programs, where students, it's basically a traditional high school's version of a trade program, where students can get college credit and professional licensure as part of their regular curriculum. So you can incorporate math into our new manufacturing program. You can incorporate different skills into our new cabinetry program and into our new information technology program, our fire science program. That's all stuff that's going with separate state funding that's specifically earmarked for that purpose. There's nothing like that for the arts. So yes, there's stuff that we need to celebrate, and we will celebrate and hold them up with it. Like we said, every band on the field gets cheered for, no matter what uniform you're wearing. But you still need to cheer for the people who need that little extra support along the way. And if you see that, we always talk about in the band world that if you see that freshman that's standing there by themselves and needs that little push along, you help guide them and give them that push to where they need to be. That's what we're doing with this program now too. So you're taking that personal approach and putting it on a systematic level.
Does the work that you did, the experiences that you had as a drum major at Gardner High School and at UMass, play into how you get stakeholders either in line or working with you or understanding what you need to happen?
Absolutely, 100%. The one thing you learn in band is how to deal with people. One thing I love about band too is that you get people who you'll never interact with except in that setting. When I was at UMass, I never thought I would interact with someone who was a turf grass management major when I was a history major. But it pulls people from all different backgrounds together and you learn their perspective. Same thing at, the high school level. People could focus on math, science, the sports team that they're doing on the side, something like that. But you get to know them and become friends, even though you normally wouldn't interact with someone in that circle because it's just not where you think you would fit. But band shows you that you can fit no matter where you think you fit, if you know how to talk to people, if you know how to understand a person, if you can find that way to connect with a person in a way you didn't connect. And that's something that I do every day here. Because I need to understand that, one, whether someone voted for me or not, I'm still supposed to represent them to the best of my ability. And that's the biggest thing that I took an oath that says that. I didn't take an oath to say I will only support the people who voted for me. I took an oath to say I will support this city. So that's something that, you learn from being in those settings, how to meet people, how to talk to people, how to understand their different perspective, even if it's something you never thought you would be able to understand because it's just not your experience that you had yourself.
Well, Mr. Mayor, your time is limited and valuable because, as has been chronicled here, you've got a big job with a lot going on. So before we finish up, I will quickly ask my now standard, less strictly resume-based band questions. What's a favorite piece of band music that you've played, outdoors or indoors?
So outdoors, I'll never forget my freshman year at UMass. We had a Phil Collins medley, and it was my first song I got to play as a member of the Minuteman Marching Band. And I had seen them before when I was at high school at the MICA finals competition. So that was the coolest thing to play too. And my sister would always stand in the front row and she would see it, and she ended up becoming a drum major later on. So that will always be a favorite for me in an outdoor. In an indoor setting, the Kalinikov Symphony. I was part of a group that played in the antiphonal trumpets. So being able to be up in the balcony and play over the crowd and see the crowd's reaction, that was really cool.
Is there a piece of band music that you have not played but you'd like to?
It's going to sound cheesy, but I really think the 1812 Overture would be really fun to play. It's one of those, UMass played it after I left, but you see it every year with the Boston Pops in Boston and everything else like that. And that's why I said it's almost that cheesy Massachusetts, New Englander type response to it. But I think that would be fun to play.
Is there a band that you would like to perform with that you haven't, either because you're not the right age or not in the right place or don't live in the right century?
One of the things that, I do look back, I have no regrets from how I did my time at college, but I wish I could have done one of the drum corps. I saw my friends who were in it. My roommates were in drum corps. My senior year, my college roommate was in Carolina Crown, and that was the year that they went pretty far. And I actually went out to Indianapolis to watch them. And so like that always seemed neat, but I always had my internships. I always had stuff that I was doing. I was having a job so that I could pay for stuff that I wanted to do. So I never got the opportunity to do it, but they've always seemed really fun.
And I have no idea how this is going to come out, but tell me one of your favorite band stories.
I'm going to give this a two-part answer. And I know they always say don't, but I'm going to do it. The first one I'm going to say is a personal, from a personal standpoint, and the second's a performance standpoint. It was 2016. The UMass band still performed at the Allentown Intercollegiate Marching Band Festival at that time. And the day that we performed at Allentown was my birthday. And I remember, my sister being like, oh, well, we can't really celebrate your birthday because it's Allentown weekend. And some of my friends being like, oh, we'll have to figure out something to do after that. And I was assigned to the trumpet bus as one of the drum major staff for that trip. And the bus took off from Allentown. We were on our way back to Amherst, and the entire trumpet section threw balloons up in the air, and Happy Birthday started playing over the microphone, and the trumpet section had a surprise birthday party for me on the drive back from Allentown. And I just was so thrown off from that it was just a neat, fun story that I'll always remember. But from a performance standpoint, it was also my senior year, and it was the Plymouth, Massachusetts Thanksgiving Parade that they do before Thanksgiving. Now, I started my time at UMass in the marching band going to the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade my freshman year, and now we were ending with a different Thanksgiving parade. And granted, it was Plymouth, but it's still really cool to bookend your time at, like that. But everything that could have gone wrong that morning went wrong. The bus company was 2 buses short on the number of buses that they were supposed to send us. If you had a car, you had to fill your car with as many people as you could and then meet us in Plymouth. So it was already a stressful day to begin with. Then we had this really stressful rehearsal in this really cramped, like just auditorium space that we didn't know how we were going to fit in there. And then we had the parade. And of course, before you step off from the parade, you're just playing the hurry up and wait game as to see when you have to go. The parade itself was fun. We got through that great. We were right before Santa Claus. So Santa Claus marched to the band. Then we had a couple hours off where we could have dinner by ourselves. And then we had the show that we rehearsed for in that concert hall after that. And, some people in between were like, we've already had the parade. Do we really have to wait, just sit around for a couple hours before we go to this concert? But we did anyway. That crowd was magnetic at that performance that night. And the amount of people who stood at the door of the band marching out, just thanking the band for performing, the school kids who ran up being like, how do I do this and stuff like that, that made everything that happened that day worth it and then some. And if we would have just dwelled on the fact that the buses didn't come and we had to drive, if we would have dwelled on the fact that now I had to go get gas on the way home, if we had dwelled on the fact that now we had to wait 3 hours before we had to perform again and get back in uniform and everything, we wouldn't have enjoyed it. But the people there and the audience there made it enjoyable, made it magnetic, and it forced us to think in a different light. And I think I'll never forget that, because that's something I still carry to me to this day, that if something went wrong in the morning, it doesn't mean something's going to go wrong in the afternoon here at work. And it's made it so that if I have to go from thing to thing here, because if there's a fatal car accident that just happened, I'm going to go check on the officers who are responding to it, the EMTs and the family, just because that's my job as someone who's the mayor of the city. But if I then have to go read to the school kids, I can't take that same attitude from one event to the other. And it's one of those you have to ground yourself and center yourself and be like, there's a reason I'm here, and it's because someone else needs that. And just like those people said they needed that concert, which made us realize we needed them just as much, that's what I build off here in this office.
I feel like my last question had been answered a number of times throughout this, and that band story kind of did as well. So if we pass on this question, who knows? But have you got a favorite band life lesson or bit of wisdom that you've found useful outside of band? Sounds as if you have.
The biggest thing I can say is adopt, adapt, and change. Because if you stay stalemate, you're going to be stuck in the old times, and you're going to be playing catch up on the long term. And you can translate that into be more of a personable person, be able to adopt and adapt the way that you approach someone, be able to adopt and adapt the way that you think about someone. Don't go in with a preconceived notion, because if something happens that's different, you can't always judge that book by that cover originally. That's the biggest takeaway I can take from anything, is that you're never going to know what problem arises. You're never going to know how someone's thinking until you sit down and talk to them. You're never going to know what experience you're going to go through, because you can't predict the future. So that's why taking that approach to things and just having that it forces you to have an open mindset and be willing to take whatever comes next and follow whatever beat the conductor decides to go with next.
Well, Mr. Mayor, and I'm pleased to say, my good friend, It has been just great to have you on and to offer a story that I doubt any of my other interviews will. The fun of the band world is that there are so many different places that former band members can end up and so many interesting stories. And boy, is yours a story. And who knows, for all we know, it could be motivating to somebody listening out there.
Well, thanks. I hope so.
Former drum major in multiple places and mayor of the city of Gardner, Mike Nicholson, thank you again so much for taking time to do this, and all the best wishes for continued success for you and your city.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Okay, one last break and we'll head for the big finish. Thank you, dear listener, for staying with me. Here comes the dogfight. This week's dogfight is brought to you by you. A few weeks ago, I put out a call to action, which is what we in the podcast biz call any content that invites the listener to respond somehow. What's the first job of a podcaster? A subset of my listenership will have answered that question just now in a particular way. Anyway, this question was, so tell me one of your favorite funny band stories, as long as this is April Fool's Day and we're thinking of humor and all. So I'll start, and then a couple of my friends will finish. I've been the conductor of a local community band for a little over a year now, and I'll talk more about that in future episodes. We have a good time in rehearsals, and laughs are always part of the bargain. At one rehearsal a couple of months ago, we managed a fairly creditable read-down of the Holst Second Suite, the third movement, Song of the Blacksmith. I closed my score and prepared to move on to my next planned sight-reading piece, and from several locations on the stage, notably from both of our barely out-of-college tuba players, shout out to UMass Lowell, came the murmur, then the chant, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. So I opened my score back up to the Holst Second Suite, fourth movement, Fantasia on the Dargeson, looked at the assembled throng, and said, the mob has spoken. And no, this is not a cheapskate recruiting pitch, but if you live near north central Massachusetts, say Ayer or Fort Devens, and you're looking for a fun Wednesday night band rehearsal, this could be the place for you. I'm just saying. Now, here's someone else's response to my call for stories. My UMass band friend Ruth, who graduated a year ahead of me, quickly posted in the comment section below my call to action Facebook post. She wrote 3 simple words, band in Boston. Counterintuitively, for this podcast, the spelling was B-A-N-N-E-D, band. It's a story which I, and lots of us Amherst band folks, think we know, but the details were always a bit hazy for folks like me who weren't actually there. Stories become myths, myths become legends, something about print the legends, something like that, I don't know. So Ruth reached out to a gentleman of both of our acquaintances who himself is a genuine legend in the UMass world, for more reasons than just this, but here's only the first remarkable thing about him. Jeff Poulton is the only person, to my knowledge, but I think I got this right, the only person ever to have been a drum major with UMass, or for that matter with any college band ever most likely, for 5 years. 1982 to 1986. And that is a story which I would love to get help telling in a future episode, if you catch my drift. Hint, hint, Jeff. But Jeff was present for a band in Boston, and he told the story in that comment section, and I shall read it forthwith. He wrote, in short, we marched in Faneuil Hall without a permit. As an editorial note, Jeff's talking about one of Boston's beloved tourist traps, Quincy Market, the Faneuil Hall Marketplace. Faneuil Hall was a meeting hall wherein a number of the Founding Fathers held forth prior to the American Revolution breaking out. Now, there's an adjacent complex of indoor and outdoor shops and restaurants, a cobblestone-paved main drag, and there's just enough room between the original Faneuil Hall and the Quincy Market building to insert a 220 or so piece band for concertizing. Anyway, back to Jeff's story of how the UMass band director, George Parks, was greeted following his band's concertizing there. The Boston PD don't appreciate it and arrested GNP on the spot. Apparently, it isn't always easier to get forgiveness than permission, LOL. So we marched the band back to the buses. By the time we got everyone loaded up, GNP had been released, so we got the heck out of Dodge, or Boston as the case may be. I have to admit, that one scared me a little bit. The Boston PD were not messing around. Normally we say, whoops, and move on. This was much different. We did get a good laugh out of it once the buses were moving. The band in Boston thing came out of multiple stories and singing on the bus on the way home while we teased GNP over a few adult beverages. Only a few. Some of the adult beverages may have been on fire. This is Rob again. I have nothing to add. Happy April Fool's Day. If you got a funny band story to tell, this is the place to send it along. We'll share it here. Okay, one last pause to recover from that, and then we'll finish up. Thanks for still listening. To wrap up this week, let's take the coda. For the coda this week, a thank you to you, my fine listener, for sticking with the Bandwagon podcast long enough to hear me saying this to you. And thank you more broadly to anyone who has checked in on our website, heyband.podbean.com, downloaded the episodes, just basically got this project off to a good start. For its opening calendar month of March 2024, the podcast topped 600 downloads. This is not bad for a little upstart podcast that isn't about politics or the Avengers or a sports ball. Now, every wee podcaster has a lofty goal and a realistic goal. My lofty goal was to get 1,000 downloads in a calendar month right out of the gate, since this earns me a reward from my podcasting host, the Podbean folks. I'll talk about that in a moment. My realistic goal was, to have any listeners at all. You got to start somewhere, and thanks to Zoe and Everin and James and Beth Ann, whose conversations really provided the statistical majority of the sound of Bandwagon, and thanks to you, I would judge that this start has been a good one indeed. In the spirit of ever looking to improve the product and the result, I'll adjust and add some publicity and marketing strategies and see if this podcast's audience can't get even wider, all the while encouraging you to keep downloading and listening and interacting. If I can get to 1,000 downloads in a calendar month, and April is slightly shorter, so who knows, it earns me the aforementioned reward of being able to make Bandwagon available to any advertisers who might want to place ads at the beginning, middle, or end of the episodes. I know, this is a reward. Not necessarily for you, although I can think of a couple of outfits that I would happily do live ad reads for, since they would be of great interest to band folks. But one of my lofty, but I hoped attainable goals for Bandwagon was to make it a part-time job, to actually make this thing pay off in a small green pieces of paper kind of way. It's already paid off in terms of very nice reviews and a few people even thanking me for doing it. My pleasure. But who knows, maybe I can make a go of it. So, what's the next step? The next step is uploading episode 7 and hoping you'll continue to listen. And hoping you'll convince your band friends to listen as well. Spread the word, and we'll keep on expanding this band community. That's Bandwagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. Bandwagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media, from source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at our website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback, be polite, but let me know what you like, what you think might change. Tell me your best band story or a suggested topic for a future episode, whatever you like. You can do that using our email address, heybandwagon@yahoo.com, or leave us a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that we do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast, unless you say otherwise. All those contact links and links to our news items, conversation topics, and my interview guest, Mike Nicholson, can be found in our show notes. Please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoy this podcast, get someone else to listen as well. As it turns out, word of mouth really is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with us every week, subscribe to Bandwagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please give us a 5-star review. It really helps other people to find the show. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do all this again next week. I'm Rob Hammerton. Detail, fall out.